All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by Chris Hancock, who is the founder of Therapy Outside the Box. And what a beautiful, beautiful conversation. Chris and I have been connected for a little while on social media and through Substack. And just recently, we decided, hey, let's get together and do a podcast. And, this was really magical because we looked at a lot of the aspects of spiritual awakening, along with inner healing and taking a lot of the work that Chris has seen and done with clients and calling upon higher beings, archangels, really putting a spiritual dimension to a lot of traditional structures and how ultimately we are changing the paradigm in mental health, in healing, and wellness to be more encompassing of the spiritual dimensions that are present. So this is a really, really good conversation, really informative, and I would encourage you to interact with Chris. Go to his website, head on to his Instagram. It's all in the episode show notes below. And if you're looking for somebody to work with one-on-one, and he is a licensed therapist, but you're looking for a more clinical person to work with, or if you're more interested in some of his spiritual services, highly recommend going through Chris. And I'm grateful that he was able to share what he does. And, ultimately, him and I are going to have a second conversation because we could have kept going for hours. So, hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe whatever platform you are on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. We all got it right there. Click that subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Comment. Let me know what you think of the show. Greatly appreciate you guys being here. Head on over to my Substack, McDermott.substack.com, McDermod.substack.com. It's free to subscribe. Get all my poems, podcast, whatever you may need on the Substack. I also have my own tarot offerings, and it's really a tarot. I don't give it enough. Um, what's the right word? I don't tell you enough about it in a sense because it's a integrative tarot and meditative experience. I've been a meditation practitioner for many years. A lot of people don't know that. I don't talk about it that much or promote the fact that you can get guided meditations through me. But right now, what I'm offering is a integrative meditation and tarot experience, and start out through a meditation and really set intentions, come into our own body, and go into the tarot reading and look at and unpack what it is that we'd like to unpack. So you can book that. It's in the episode show notes below. Use the code 5D to get 20% off, and if you buy two of them, package, you get a third one. So really, if you're interested in multiple, you can get three for the price of two, and it's a good way to see some changes over time, space them out, and really do some deeper work. So if you're interested, highly recommend it. 5D, 20% off. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota, your one-stop shop for all your holistic wellness, spiritual needs. If you make it in, tell Patty, Evan from the Fifth Dimension sent you. She'd love to hear that. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the podcast with Chris Hancock. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I'm very excited to have Chris Hancock with me, and he is the founder of Therapy Outside the Box. Chris, if I were to list all of your different certifications and what you're qualified in, it would probably take me about an hour to do so because you are so well-rounded in the approach that you take. So I'll let you kind of explain what you do a little bit more than me, but it's a pleasure to be connected and hop on a podcast because we've both been familiar with each other for a while. And so to hop on here, man,
Yes.
it's beautiful.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with you on this day after Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you, any of the listeners as well. It'll be out there in a timely manner, so that saying Merry Christmas might still be relevant. Um,
Right.
but Chris, I'd love to start. I mean, like I said, I've followed you for a while, and I've gotten a chance to read about your work and a lot of the testimonials, and so I feel like I have a sense of understanding where you're coming from. But could you kind of put it into perspective for some of the listeners and sort of what it is that you do and how you came to embody the space that you are embodying now? Because I think the approach that you're taking is very unique in its own right, and I really love what it is that you are bringing to people and the services that you are offering. So, I mean, how would you kind of wrap a bow on that for any of the
Yeah.
listeners?
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, first I'll say, I think all the certifications and whatnot, as you said, it's mostly meaningless to me. Really, they're all just like means to an end to get you where hopefully you feel in a heart-driven way you really should be and what your
Mhm.
offering is. So since I just sort of put it that way, I'll say, boy, it took me a good while to get to a point in this career. I'm a therapist, so let's just
Mhm.
start there. Licensed therapist, practicing a little bit outside of Nashville, Tennessee, from New York originally. Went to grad school in New York, did more or less traditional training, grad school, MSW, kind of contemporary, psychodynamically trained, very in the box, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
It took me a good while, probably roughly 20 years of practice to realize that the way in which I was working was really not all of who I am.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of the meat and potatoes of like probably why I'm sitting here across from someone like you that's mystically informed and oriented and all this stuff that we're both in the same wheelhouse. And
Mhm.
so many more people in the collective are kind of waking up, right, to
Right.
the expansive awareness of how little we know and how much there is to attempt to try to understand and comprehend in this crazy clown world we live in.
Right.
Okay, so maybe there's a trail we'll go off
Yeah.
on in a moment,
Right.
but basically kind of attempted long story short, after many, many years doing traditional therapy, working in community mental health settings, addiction settings, all outpatient is how I sort of cut my teeth in this career post graduation in the year 2000. Um, I struck out on my own in 2006, seven, end of six, beginning of seven, started my own practice and have more or less practiced conventional, traditional, inside the box, individual therapy and lots of group therapy type of
Mhm.
work until about 2018 when this kind of insidious dark night of the soul that I had been in for years and not quite realizing it was that,
Mhm.
just thinking it was just kind of tired, burnout, adrenal fatigue, lots of other factors in my life, personally and professionally, that could have, well, that did just sort of lead me to view it that way, not giving it much credence that there might be some other components of this.
Mhm.
So basically, all of that seemed to lead spirit. I'll just put it that broadly and that generally to have to take a good swipe at me to stop me enough, not just slow me down, but stop me because I wasn't getting the messages and not slowing down to really start to turn more pointedly inward to ask what is going on here.
Mhm.
So I was kind of brought to my literal knees, I'd say, somewhere around the end of 2018. And that was what I now look at as the kind of grand finale, the championship rounds, as they say in the boxing world, of my Dark Night of the Soul, the real wake-up call, where I really feel it's accurate to say I was brought right to the edge of madness.
Mhm.
And not knowing what the hell it was that was going on with me in that finale, I simply decided to do what I already knew how to do on paper because I've been a metaphysical student and aspirant, since basically late high school, right?
Mhm.
This is nothing new for me, but I wasn't putting it into practice. I wasn't bringing that all in, right? So spirit brought me to my knees, and I decided the only thing to do to get clarity was simply to start surrendering. So I started a grand surrender experiment. Um, as has been done by many before me and will be done,
Mhm.
conducted by many after me. And I just started sitting, meditating, praying, and literally just trying to keep it simple and asking for clarity, meaning, please help me to know what I am going through. What is this and what is it not? Because I was in such a dark kind of right on the edge of madness, I'd say, that I didn't know really like is my marriage over? Is my career over? Am I being kind of thrust out of this to something completely different? I was that lost for a good hot minute, as we say. And so again, attempting long story short here, in those surrender experiments, which I put time into it every day for I don't know how many months really on end, interspersed with long Walden style walks in the woods,
Hmm.
uh, to try to just, get out of the four wall scenario. The clarity started to come, and it began to come first in ways that is still very difficult to describe in language,
Hmm.
and therefore I really can't. Just suffice to say, it started to come, and I started to just get inspiration or impulses or intuitions that would tell me things like it was basically process of elimination is how it started. Like I started to realize, no, your marriage isn't over. That's not what this is.
Hmm.
And then came no, your career is not over. You're not supposed to leave this, but it's time to do it in a completely different way. It's time to rewrite and start all over again. So, and difficult as that was, I think I had a knowing inside about what that meant.
Hmm.
And today I can look at that and say, thank God, because literally that was a gift from God. And from what followed from there was a little bit more kind of mystical, but yet also more concrete, more easy to describe phenomenon. And I put it that way, particularly because now we're really getting into the mystical.
Hmm.
You could even say supernatural. So I started to get downloads and some inner mind visions, not external visions, seeing angels and whatnot, but internal mind's eye visions and downloads, and one of which came at the end of a sit where I literally saw and heard in my mind's eye, you're being given a gift of holy discernment.
Hmm.
And boy, did that land, even though I didn't know what that meant, because I'd never heard those two words put together, holy and discernment. I've never heard that as a phrase. But what that confirmed for me was that was not my own mind making that up.
Hmm.
That was something that was from other, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until weeks and weeks later where I was already starting to experiment with different methods, more outside the box stuff, starting to work on an energy psychology method that I'll talk about later if you want. But in using that method, in using conventional muscle testing, like you might be familiar with, kinesiology,
Hmm.
um, I started to notice that my body, particularly my head, was responding involuntarily, yes or no, as is to indicate the person is strong on this or weak on this, right? And at first, I didn't know what that was,
Hmm.
but it's never stopped. And I realized in fairly short order that, that's the practical application of that gift of holy discernment, because it's like a built-in pendulum, right?
Yeah.
Although pendulums can be pretty quirky, and you get a lot of paradoxical responses, because I personally feel that they're open to any type of earthbound, discarnate, or lower astral entities that might be in the area that want to mess with you, right? So I like to think that this internal mechanism that I was gifted with is more reliable, and it is, in my view.
Hmm.
Um, so where was I going with that? Okay, so that came on, and then I just started to get actual downloads like most people get, more kind of standard downloads, messages, whatnot. I had one profound experience in that time where I didn't know who or what it was then, but I now know, using my own guidance that I was brought online with, that profound, maybe 30-second experience of absolute bliss, almost like a unity consciousness experience, spontaneous, but more just like a shot of love and bliss and joy, it just landed on me and just blew a hole through like a good portion of that darkness that I was still trying to find my way out of. I now know that that was Mother Mary energy coming in. So I had already discovered that Saint Germain was working with me.
Hmm.
perhaps Yeshua energy, Melchizedek. I think you know
Yep.
kind of that which I'm speaking here, and probably most of your audience does as well. Um, anyway, so suffice to say, this was my being brought to my knees in this way was quite intentional. And I think it was like spirits trying to say, okay, we haven't been able to get your attention any other way.
Hmm.
So here it is. We're going to make you a little crazy. So you realize you have no choice but to just completely surrender and start really listening. And so thank God I did. And so I'll just share this. One of those pretty meaningful and profound downloads right around that time was something like hearing, and again, hearing and kind of seeing in the mind's eye, like a claircognizant or clairgnosis type of experience is a way to put it.
Hmm.
I remember the phrase, the world has been waiting for you to come forth with all of who you are.
Mm.
It was very close to that, if not verbatim. And that one, unlike the holy discernment, which I had to kind of sit with and wait to get clarity about what does that actually look like and mean, that download I just knew what that meant. And
Yeah.
in a way, that was an explanation for what I had gone through and the fact that my life was about to radically change as long as I were to say, yes, I'm in.
Mm.
So I started to then get less clear, but certainly just more assurance in different forms from there forward that was telling me it is really just time to proceed fearlessly with radical faith and trust and put it all out there with what is going to be kind of happening,
Mm.
and just wait and watch and see that you will be guided and protected all the way.
That's
So,
beautiful.
yeah, so that was about 5 years ago, and I am happy to be able to say that that was not false.
Mm. Right. Well, I
Because, yeah,
was gonna say your embodiment speaks for itself in that way, in a lot of ways.
and I mean, it's still in process, and it will be forever. I'm now in this for life, so you could say, to make it a little more concrete. So this has paved the way for these more outside the box offerings that I've kind of developed, in some sense, brought back. The
Hmm.
things that I had flirted with them in the past, but couldn't quite make stick because I just wasn't grounded enough. It wasn't there enough. So buried in the workaday day stuff and family and children and everything. None of which I would change or take back or do differently. But it's just nice to be at a point now where I know I have that gnosis, knowing that I am on the right track, and I'm not doing everything perfectly. I'm still learning and always will be, but I'm doing what I'm here to do. Like I'm starting to fulfill the soul contract.
Beautiful. I love that, man. Well,
Yeah.
it puts the full journey, as you said, makes it necessary to actually get to the point where you are. And you know, it's interesting using that phrase like you almost on the brink of madness. I have definitely been there as well. It's really a portal to transformation when you just kind of surrender and say, you know what? It's what it is. I'm gonna go heart open, the brain heart lead, brain follow. I tend to say that quite a lot, you know. It's like I
Dude,
don't understand
love
it,
it.
but
I
that's
love it. I love the way you put it too. A portal to transformation.
mm, yep.
Absolutely. I've never thought about that phrase or those two words together, portal to transformation. That's exactly what it was. I've thought about it as kind of a gateway experience.
Hmm.
Kind of like Saint Germain came on as what in some circles, like who did I hear talk about this? Who's the channel I'm thinking of? Michaela Sheldon. Do you know
Okay.
her?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's used the term gateway guide. It's like when you
Hmm.
first come online with this mystical, wackadoo shit. If you're fortunate, I guess, or if it's part of your soul contract or whatever, the first guide that's going to come in, whether that's a personal guide or ascended master or supreme being energy or whatever, there you could call them like your gateway guide, kind of like your gateway drug.
Hmm.
So
100%.
yeah, so Saint Germain was my gateway guide, but the rest of it was a portal to transformation. I might have to steal that from you.
Please do. By all means. I'm glad the words resonated in that way, man. And
Yeah.
I mean, would you say like I feel like the this is from, outsider perspective. The work that you're doing now, it feels like in our society, and I've seen this working in various settings, particularly when I was living out I'm in South Dakota now, but when I was living out in Montana, I was working in a homeless shelter, right? And
Oh yeah.
and there's so many people who would be the mental health wise, that was the cause of their,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
the reason for homelessness. But you'd also look at that, and some of them would say some of the most profound, spiritually, like,
Yeah.
oh my Lord, like you're tapped in, but it was they're on the brink of madness, right? And so, would you say kind of the work you're doing is giving people the opportunity who are maybe in that space to approach it in a method that is not traditionally confined in because when we're looking at the in the box methods, right? Somebody's
Yeah.
on the brink of madness, they're going to diagnose them with, I don't know, whatever label you want to put on it,
Oh
right?
yeah. Some kind of psychotic disorder or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But if in your approach, you're kind of taking where people are at, and I think a lot of the mental health crisis is a spiritual disorder, more not even I don't even know if disorder is the right word, but more of
No.
a spiritual
Yeah.
I don't
Well, spiritual dearth or a
hmm
spiritual crisis.
crisis. That's the word I
Yeah.
was definitely looking for, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and our traditional methods don't necessarily provide the space to actually go into that with the right intention and seeing it for what it is, I'd imagine, right? And that
Well,
I,
that's
I feel
absolutely
like
right.
it just exacerbates the actual issue instead of
Oh,
providing real
completely.
solution.
Yes, it does not. So if you're talking about sort of mainstream psychology and psychiatry, I'd say generally speaking, you're completely on the money
Hmm.
because the indoctrination and the emphasis is to look for the pathology.
Mm.
So it gets pathologized, right?
Right.
Yeah. So for sure, I'm trying to be out there as someone who would view such things differently. That doesn't mean I deny the reality of mental illness. I've worked in this field, like I said in the beginning, my first 7 years in community mental health. That's hardcore psychosocial suffering, let's put it
Mm.
that way, which includes psychosis, schizophrenia, and all that stuff. I'm not a denier of that, but I just think it's never quite so simple because we are more complex than many of us know, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
let's face it. So, yeah, so there's often an overlap. That's the tricky thing. Like Ken Wilber spoke to this in his concept that he called the pre-trans fallacy.
Right.
I'm not a big Wilbur guy. I read a little bit of his integral psychology stuff kind of in grad school, but never really didn't do a deep dive. But when I came across that, that's when I was in a time really before all this happened for me, 2017.
Mm.
I got a client or two during that time that really was in that sort of overlap where I was trying to figure out, is this more psychosis, more genetic kind of mental illness phenomenon, or is this more spiritual? Because when you got people who you're seeing and hearing evidence of both, you realize it's not always so cut and dry. So Wilbur's pre-trans fallacy was the what he was calling the tendency to either look at all such phenomenon as wholly psychological and only, or wholly and only spiritual. And he was basically saying in a lot of these type of cases like we're talking about where there's overlap, you're
Mm.
making a mistake either way,
Mm. Right.
right? You go too hard, to one extreme or the other, basically.
Right.
And this is how people who are having genuine spiritual awakening phenomenon get pathologized, get medicated, etc. And that usually doesn't go well,
Hmm. That's
or the reverse, right? So
right. I was gonna say, in my point of being on the brink of madness, I'd say probably 2018 or so. If I had went or talked about the experiences with certain people, I'm sure
Yeah,
they'd have been like, "You need to see somebody," and who knows what that would have led down when it was really looking back, just genuine spiritual awakening and not necessarily having the structure to
right,
fully um, optimize it and go into it. And, I was doing a lot of meditation and starting to
right,
really to almost take a process of surrender, like you talked about. That was really my beginning into
right.
surrendering into the spiritual calling. But, that's not, I'm sure there's a lot of people who enter into that sort of awakening and, they seek the help of the mainstream, if you will. And then it turns
Yeah.
into something that is pathologized and they're not able to fully express what's on the other side of the awakening, right? And it
Oh,
gets
completely.
lost, and I think
Yes.
that's a great disservice to who we are because
Yeah.
ultimately at the end of the day, we want to be the fullest embodiment of who we can be. And that's very much where I'm at. My kind of almost, I'd say the essence of my work, whether it's poetry, podcasting,
Yeah.
writing in general, my goal is to help people remember who they are. Remember who
Oh,
you
I
are.
love it.
Remember
Love
who
it.
you are. That's it. That's what I want people to, from any conversation.
Yeah,
Remember who you are. That's it.
totally. Yeah.
Come back to yourself.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I used to have a bumper sticker that we had like on the back of our one of our kitchen chairs that said, "Remember who you wanted to be."
Mm. Yep.
And and it was always a kind of a litmus test for when people would come over.
Yeah.
When they would see that and read it, first they'd be a little, thrown by, why is there a bumper sticker on the back of a kitchen table chair, right? But when I would see people read it, people either instantly got it or they would be like, what does that mean?
Mm.
Just didn't get it, right?
Yep. Yep.
So similar when you say like, remember who you are, some of us are going to have an instant knowing of what that means.
Right.
Some people may never understand. What is that supposed to mean?
Right, exactly. And there,
Yeah,
there's deeper, there's levels to it in a sense, and it meets you where you are at, which is,
right.
I think, the beauty of it. I mean, I would love to hear, Chris,
Yeah.
about some of the like actual practical methods that you are starting to incorporate into your practice, right? What are, I mean, I was
Yeah.
reading about the one that really caught my eye was the multidimensional divine light transmission. I was
Yeah.
reading about that and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is beautiful. It sounds beautiful, right? And I think it's one example of the
Yeah.
full scope of work that you're doing. But I mean, I would love to hear about, what it looks like, what
Yeah.
sort of, what the results have been,
Oh,
like kind of
sure.
the
Yeah,
approaches that you're
sure.
taking, man.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not surprised that that's the one that grabbed your eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's certainly the least practical. I'd say that. It's really hardly anything practical about it. So it's not for everybody. That's for
Yeah.
sure. So we call that MDLT for short,
Yeah.
since it's a long, kind of clunky name. But that name of that process was downloaded to me one day after I already started doing that. That is multidimensional divine light transmission. I realized, okay, I need to know what to call it. So in one of my kind of divine communion, spirit communion sits or meditations, I asked specifically if any of these higher gods or sources have an idea of what this is to be called, please, I'm open. And at the very end of that meditation that day, there it came.
Mhm.
And I believe that came from Saint Germain. So basically, yeah, that is my most recent and definitely most out there offering.
Mhm.
It's a little hard to describe, but I'll try. It is basically it's I think relatively accurate to say that I came online as a theurgical channel. So theurgy is a kind of arcane term that goes back to Neoplatonism. And the Neoplatonists like Iamblichus, who I hadn't even heard of before, was somebody who I think, like a lot of the Neoplatonists at that time, drew a lot from ancient Egyptian spiritual practices, ancient Egyptian alchemy in particular. Um, and so theurgy is a term that basically translates to divine working or divine action communally shared. And it really is more complex than that, but it was a lot about their view of the soul, and that only some part of us, when we embody, only some part of our soul descends into incarnation, and the rest is in the noose, in the ether, what have you, in the heavenly
Hmm.
realms. And that theurgy was set up as a way to try to connect the two.
Hmm.
I'm probably, to the hardcore academic theurgist, I'm probably bastardizing that, but oh
I
well,
was
I'll
gonna say
just
it,
leave it
it
there.
works for me.
Yeah. But what struck me when I was trying to find the right term for what is this that I came online with, this way of invoking, as they would say at that time, invoking the gods, right?
Hmm.
I would just say invoking various divine emanations of the Godhead. So just examples are like Yeshua, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, Goddess Sophia from Gnosticism, Goddess Isis, various of the archangelics, not usually the Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, big cheeses, right?
Hmm.
But the lower hierarchies, the ones that in many consider to be more available for our asking for intervention, right? So here we're talking about Archangel Hanael, Chamuel, Rael. I could go on, but those are just some examples. As well as ascended masters, Saint Germain, Portia, Kuan Yin, these types of divine emanations. I just put it that way.
Hmm.
Um, in this whole dark night into awakening, this is what I seem to come online with, this ability to invoke those energies or some portion of their energies, right? So that's what I've been doing in my personal sits for these years, doing decrees, prayers, and then sitting in these kind of divine or spirit communion meditations, until a couple of years ago, I started to feel strongly nudged that it is time to begin to bring this to people.
Hmm.
Like, this is not just for you, buddy. This has been you incubating and kind of curating this, but this is part of what your offering is to be. Should you keep saying yes and just trust? So I did. So
Hmm.
I started selectively offering it to people that I was already working with in my therapy work, people who I knew would be like, oh, hell yeah, let's go.
Hmm.
So that's what I started doing. Then I got the name downloaded. So, to try to put it simply, it is a theurgical process of engaging divine emanations to bring in a transmission of divine light, which can be energy, information, healing power, and potential, in some cases visuals, in some cases, let's say, the beginnings of a safe sort of kundalini arousal.
Hmm.
It can be past life data dump kind of downloads to people. In some cases, it's going out of body, traveling, if somebody is really ready for that. So, to try to put it simply, really what it looks like in practice, MDLT, is that when we know we're going to do this, we settle in like we're going to do a co-meditation together. I do a verbal invocation, which is a little long and probably doesn't even need to be that long, but it's just kind of the practice that I've developed.
Hmm.
And I invite and invoke in whatever higher sources are most appropriate. Usually I'm able to gauge ahead of time who it's going to be. And I'll tell the person, so today it's Sophia energy coming in and Archangel Chamuel, right? It's often two, sometimes one, but often two. They kind of tag team. And then we just settle into a meditation. It's mostly conducted in silence, and the person has their experience. So,
Hmm.
my role as the kind of theurgical channel is simply to make the invocation, hold space, kind of like I'm a bridge, right?
Right.
Like a Christ consciousness bridge, really, a conduit. I'm not verbally channeling. It's not that. It's not voice channeling. It's not mediumship. It's not a psychic reading. It's none of those things, which is why I had to go looking for, what do I call this? Right.
Right.
So it is kind of a modern, modified theurgy or theurgical process. And so so it's really a direct contact experience between the higher source or sources and the person who is the receiver of
Mm.
this experience. And I don't usually know what is going on in the process until we're done and the person shares with me what they saw, felt, experienced, what they kind of just knew was happening, what was being offered. The only thing I can usually gauge on the front end, in addition to who is going to come in as host, is on what level of the recipient's being will they be primarily working on. So that could be on the emotional body level, physical somatic, neurological, psychological, mental, higher self or holy Christ self, or the level of the I am presence or the super consciousness or universal soul level, different ways to think about these things. The level of our being that's closest to the Godhead. The work can
Mm.
be conducted on that level. Genetic DNA. There's been instances, I've had many of them, where there's a DNA upgrade and activation that is the work. And the last level that I can think of sometimes is the level of the energetic body. So usually through one of the energy centers or chakras, or the work takes place on the energy body or the etheric double spiritual twin, the Ka, if you will, in the ancient
Mhm.
Egyptian alchemy way of thinking about it. So the experience can run the gamut from just simply a person feeling calm and a little bit of sense of like peace and bliss and a sense of there being some presence with me. So that's why I often think of calling this process really a spiritual presence experience, or a co-facilitated mystical experience. So on the one end could be sort of the calm, peace and bliss and a feeling of the presence, all the way to on the most extreme end, like I said, a person can have a total out of body experience.
Mm.
Um, psychic dismemberment, kind of like in the shamanic world, like being taken apart and put back together. I've
Yep.
had a few of those take place. So those are the most extreme, and those don't happen very often. I feel like only if in the infinite wisdom of these divine beings, they know what they're coming in to do. We're not saying, so today we want this to happen and that.
Right.
Again, so this is a surrender experience. So I do my best to make sure that people know you got to come in open to whatever. You have to have more faith than fear, not perfect faith, because I don't even have that,
Hmm.
but you have to have more faith than fear. You have to just be open with an attitude of awe, reverence, respect, gratitude, and what will be, and trusting that these divine emanations are never going to give a person, never going to give you more than you have the capacity to receive,
Mm. That's
right?
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are not lower astrals that are interested in tricking and spooking us. This is not what
Right.
that, they are
Yeah.
not welcome here.
That's beautiful, man. Well, I
Yeah.
love that with this type of like service or offering,
Yeah.
there's a higher wisdom in it. So, I mean,
Yes.
you're right in the sense that nobody's going to come in and get something that they can't handle or that they're not meant to experience. And, I feel like for a
Yeah.
lot of people, this could be a good way to um, have direct contact with these types of beings when maybe that's not something that they're regularly doing in their own practice, or, does maybe they want to, or they don't necessarily know how to hold that space, or they don't have the time. There's a whole bunch of factors in that, right? But
Totally
I
true.
it can kind of open the
Yes.
doorway for a lot of people to, because
Oh, yeah.
we're all capable of this
Yes.
type of contact. And I don't think people always realize that as much as you are a divine conduit, as much
Right.
as I might be,
Right.
every single person listening to this is as well. Not just can be, they are. It's just a matter of
Yes.
tuning in and calling upon that with faith instead of fear. Because if we do it from
Yes.
fear, we might attract something in that is fear based. And
Oh, you will. There's
right.
no doubt you will. Yes.
So,
That's right. You're right. 100% I agree. Anyone can do it. This is not a special anointing for only the select few. I
mhm.
think that's an old myth that these types of experiences are only available to the spiritual luminaries and the mystics and the masters. That ain't the case because I'm none of those, my friend. And I just came out of this out of surrendering and saying yes again and trusting. And the best thing that can come out of that MDLT process, really, or one of the best, is that a person has, at the very least, and I say least as if it's nothing. I mean, if a person just has a palpable, visceral sense of like, there was a loving, benevolent energy with me today that came for me today to
Mhm.
just be with me and provide me something that I may not even understand all of what it is, but I felt it, I sensed it, I heard it, I saw it in my mind's eye. That's pretty freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And if that can inspire people to realize, hey, see, this is for you too. All you had to do was say, yes, I'm open to it.
Mm,
And then maybe they take that and develop their own practice that's similar to how this came on for me.
right.
And then, right, it's like the paradox of the individual and the collective awakening. It's one and the same. The
Mm,
more of us that individually, come into our higher self or our holy Christ self, or come into our own way of connecting with the divine, well, then aren't we adding to the exponential rise of the collective awakening?
absolutely. Well, the macro just reflects the micro and vice
Right.
versa, you know? It's a The world is as it is solely because that's what the individuals have perceived and created through their perception, and that's where we're at. And to
Yeah.
me, I actually feel like, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, the almost dark night of the soul that we're in with humanity at large
Yeah.
is it's humanity's on that doorstep of madness in a lot of ways, right? And we kind of have to decide
Totally.
are we going to just surrender into it and come out on the other side in a sense that you have,
Yes.
that I have, from a place of our higher self and spiritually rooted, or are we going to
Yeah.
take a more pathological uh way of thinking as it is in the traditional sense, right? And I think the
Yep.
propaganda and the system as it's created is really pushing hard to
Oh,
to choose the lower path, because this
oh yeah.
this this shift is inevitable for all of us. It's part of our
Yeah.
spiritual evolution. And
Yeah.
I feel like we're on the doorstep, and it's like, all right, do we open the door? Do we go in? Do we surrender? And
Yeah.
I feel like we're at the point now where we are actively making that choice in everything that we do. That's why all of our choices right now are, if we just if our only intention for the whole day is to wake up and let's allow our heart, or allow the whatever the intuition is saying, even if it
Yeah.
doesn't feel significant, every single choice we make, we're trying to be rooted in our intuition. That is huge for our own awakening and for mankind at large. Honestly, that's going to create the shift that we're speaking about. It isn't always
100%.
it
Yes.
it's the experiences that we're talking about, and
Right.
the MDLT. I think that can speedline the process, but that's
Oh,
like that's just one aspect of it in a lot of ways, right? It's like the integration work that comes after is following that call and what we come in
yeah.
contact with in like an MDLT session, you know?
Completely. Yeah. There's a reason why integration has become kind of a buzzword,
Mm, yeah.
uh, embodiment, integration, for better or worse, because once things become buzzwords, they get diluted, right?
Right.
But there's a reason why I think in the collective consciousness we're more aware of, like in plant medicine circles, right?
Hmm.
It's all about the integration, which is simple but not easy
Yeah.
process, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's easy to say, oh, you just have to integrate, and most people say, great, I'm on board, but what the hell does that mean, and how do I go about that?
Right.
Yeah, but to your point, I agree completely. Our actions, but even down to like our thoughts and words, right?
Mm,
It's never more important, maybe, in the history of this baby planet, right? Because yes, there are dark forces vying to retain control. I think we can all see that, right? Dare I
hmm.
say, psychopaths run the world,
Yep.
right? Wetiko, right? Mind virus, dark forces, all this kind of stuff. I don't want to go too off on all that, but I think it's why it's so important that the rest of us who are not trying to run the world and dominate humans and take their power away and all this, we do our best from the most loving, compassionate, sincere place, which really starts with, I think, in my mind, the simplicity of our intention for each and every day.
Mm,
Since all this started for me, 2018, 2019, I have not missed a day where every morning I surrender to the will of the divine,
mm,
in various ways, and all the sort of decree practices and stuff with my sits whenever I can do those, which is not every day, but it's at least a couple times a week. It starts with the same. And last April, I came online with a way somebody gave me this little kind of simple but not easy way to make a direct connection to what some would call probably the Akashic. I don't look at it that way at all, because it's really, these are kind of telepathic messages coming from the same sources who come in to work with me and work with my clients through MDLT and also through my IFS practice, if people are open to inviting in the transpersonal into
mm.
internal family systems depth therapy work. Maybe if we have time, we'll touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But basically, this practice of receiving direct telepathic messages from various sources, that I've been collecting. I have a folder of them now. It's a couple of times a week, usually since last April, I think is when it started. Among various other things that I'm getting, they're all basically speaking to this very thing that we're talking about the that it's critical mass time of awakening. And the more of us that can just be surrendering each day to the will of the divine, the highest and best good for self and other, etc., and doing our best to be in service to others, again, to counteract the kind of Wetiko psychopathic service to self
Hmm.
forces that are pushing against that, right?
Mm.
The better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, brother. I'm right
Uh,
there with you. And
yeah.
I take a very similar approach in my day to day. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, I'd say 9 days out of 10, I can go to bed saying, wow, I was in service to something much larger than myself, right? And none of us are perfect. And I think that's
Right.
a we have to accept that we're not always going to make a decision that is fully in alignment with the divine. And we still have emotions, we still have impulses, we still have temptations, right? Just because
Yes.
we're spiritually connected doesn't mean we're not these abort. I am not an embodiment of Yeshua, right? Per se,
Right.
right?
That's right.
I
Yeah.
don't, and so it's
You
like
know
we kind
what?
of have
You know,
grace
man,
for these things.
I've wrestled with that a lot. I really
Yeah.
have. Like one of my violet decree, flame decrees, I've always kind of wrestled with it. The one that goes, I am a being of violet fire. I am the purity God desires.
Mm,
I actually prefer, I am a being of violet fire. I am the love and light. Oh, no, no, my love and light grows higher and higher.
mm,
And the reason that I prefer that is because the purity concept kind of bothers me.
yeah.
And because I know that I am not pure, 100% pure. It's kind of like the old Saint Francis of Assisi thing. I have been all things unholy.
Mm,
Right? And if God can work through me, God can work through anyone. I try to remember that. But it's funny, in one of those kind of telepathic message exercises about a month ago, I think it was Saint Germain on that one, or maybe Chamuel. I'd have to look, but whoever it was a male energy, masculine, spoke to that directly and basically said, by the way, brother, basically, like, you are pure. Perfection is not, it's not about perfection. As
mm,
long as you're in the flesh and blood, that is not expected. It never was, it never will be. What is required is purity of intention, sincerity, and dedication to being an instrument, however flawed, of the will of the divine or God consciousness or Christ consciousness. And you were doing that very well. Fear not. It was something like that. And it brought
mm.
tears, man. I was like, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
good. I won't trip over that one too hard
Right.
anymore. Right.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's funny that you say that because I was about to follow up with what you were saying that maybe we almost need a new definition of what we view as purity, right? Because I think
Yeah.
we tend to make it something that is seemingly unattainable as human beings, and that, like, it's almost like we would need to leave the body, like the we
Exactly.
to
Yes.
actually attain.
If it's synonymous with perfection, then yes, we would have to drop the body.
Right, exactly. But as long as we're here, it's
Right.
like, well, we can embody purity through honest intention, through leading with our heart, through a sense of devotion. And as long
Yeah.
as we're guided by that sense of devotion, well, in turn, that makes you pure. That because you're pure at heart, pure at mind. And so that's been something I've been wrestling with lately as well. It's like, well, that I guess that would mean I am pure, right? And it's
Yeah.
and to actually embody and acknowledge that there's a true, like, it's heartfelt. It's assuring because it's like I think we're all
Yeah.
it's easy to define ourselves by the ideas of our sins or who we
Right.
have been, or the fact that we're not these like
Yeah.
perfect spiritual beings. Like it's like we always have more to work on. It's
Right.
very easy, and I think it's a big issue in a lot of spiritual circles, even that, like, this concept. And I don't know if it's always
Yeah.
talked about, because I something I've really been trying to make a point of this year in particular, that you can't sacrifice self-acceptance for the concept of self-improvement. Because I mean, without self-acceptance, what's the point of self-improvement? You kind of need to accept yourself first, and then
Well,
from
yeah.
there,
Oh
then you can
man,
improve.
there you're speaking to, one of the grand paradoxes, right?
Mm,
Like Carl Jung put it, basically, I'm paraphrasing, anything that we wish to change, and I think by that he meant about ourselves, our perception of others in the world, we have to accept first.
mm,
Meaning we can't alchemize change, or we can't transmute a negative or a problem or a lower frequency issue into something higher and have it be a sustained change if we're doing battle with it,
yeah.
rejecting ourselves, judging ourselves for it, or denying it or fighting against it. In other words, we have to accept the presence of said issue, defect, problem, whatever. Have to come to some white flag. I raise the flag. I accept that this is here.
Mm.
Only then do we have the grist for the mill and the fodder for alchemizing change or healing or growth, right?
Right,
Yeah.
100%, man. And I
But
think,
that's a paradox that people really struggle with. That is one of the reasons, and maybe I'll just pivot here if I
yeah,
may,
for sure.
into why I love the multiplicity of mind-based IFS, internal family systems
Hmm.
therapy approach, because that, long story short, is how we view ourselves as having a self and parts.
Mm,
Parts are like sub-personalities of us, right? That we're a complex system in that way, kind of like we're part of an external family, a community, a culture. The same multiplicity exists within us, within our psyche and our personality, and that's a much more practical, still kind of weird
hmm.
and sort of shamanic and woo-woo way, but it is a practical way of going within to attempt to, for example, find the part of us that wants to deny or not accept that we have said issue, struggle, problem, deficit, hurt, wound, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Until we can work with the part that is doing battle and wants to project it out onto others or deny that it even exists, we can't even get started with healing or transmuting it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
and what's interesting? I think I agree with that 100%. And one of the most profound things I did early on in my own spiritual journey, this was actually sort of a catalyst for it, was I was in my last year of college. This was 2016, 2017, around there, and we did a class that it was I needed a summer credit, so I took a intro to counseling class, right? And I come from an education major background, so I kind of went into it with the thought like, oh, I can learn about counseling and I could use that
yeah,
in teaching and education, right? And it
yeah,
was in Costa Rica, so I kind of viewed it as like through my college, they took a trip down to Costa Rica and they did the class there. And
yeah,
so in my mind, I was like, oh, cool, I can go learn about counseling and I can go party in Costa Rica for 2 weeks, right?
yeah.
That was
Trip to the rainforest.
right,
Right.
yeah, no. And but what it ended up being was this deeply rooted, like holistic course on looking at the self and in relation to counseling and look and the
Oh,
one of
wow.
the main assignment was writing a whole essay on just what you described, the parts of the self. And this was a big concept we talked about. And we talked a lot, we learned a
Nice.
lot about Carl Jung, and we learned the dynamics of internal family systems and
Oh,
breaking
nice.
down the
Yeah.
self. And for me,
Wow.
I had never even considered the fact that there were different parts of myself that existed and maybe had different motivations, different
Yeah.
had different traumas or intentions, right? And we're
That's
breaking
right.
this stuff down in class, and I'm like, oh my, and I'm like, it's like breaking down who I thought I was in the process, right? And it was one of the
Wow.
most opening up experiences. And what's funny is that it was under a traditional college structure, but the professor himself was very holistic and spiritually based, so he knew what he was doing when he was teaching this course.
Well,
Uh,
that's the richest intro to counseling course I've ever heard of.
right, and it's beautiful, and they still offer it in this at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So if
Oh, wow.
anybody
Okay.
wants a more holistically rooted
Yeah.
counseling or psychology program, they're
Yeah.
very much, I think, one of the only uh, programs in the country that actually offers a I think it's a it's either I think it's a master's degree in holistic psychology. Like you can go and study that as the program. But
Man, if I knew about that back when, I probably would have applied.
well,
Yeah.
right. And it's funny. I actually had the thought, man, if I could go back and do over, I'd probably get that as my degree. But what's interesting is I feel like sometimes the spiritual terminology and lingo when we're talking about wholeness and we're talking about the wholeness of the being, sometimes I think it neglects the fact that we do have parts of self and different, underlying, like we were talking
Yeah.
about motivations. So there's like
Yeah.
a paradox or a
Absolutely.
contrast. And, if we're embracing
Yeah.
wholeness and we're trying
Yeah.
to be whole, maybe we're not doing the necessary breaking down of the different
Yeah.
parts of self. And we're kind of negating different aspects of our healing in a lot of ways.
I would agree completely. Is another paradox here in that, the concept that is the foundation of IFS and some psychological models that came before it. But
Hmm.
IFS really, really crystallized the idea of we all have a larger self,
Hmm.
undamaged, eternal, divine spark, the essence of who we are, or the seed of the soul, if you will. And we all have a constellation of parts that get thrust into these different roles as a result of the slings and arrows of life, right? And into roles of playing protective roles and oftentimes younger parts that we call exiles that are more vulnerable, carrying hurts and burdens and wounds, some of which are generational, ancestral. So we could go way off on that, but just to say, the paradox is that it's intuitive
Hmm.
in the simplicity of the concept, meaning if you ask any child, right, do you have a part of you that wants to eat grilled cheese for dinner and have ice cream for dessert every single night, but another part of you that kind of tells you or knows that, yeah, that's not really maybe a good idea? Every child would say yes, right?
Hmm.
So the idea that we all have different parts of us with different thoughts, opinions, views, etc., is intuitive, but yet when IFS was brought into the larger psychological community back in the 80s,
Hmm.
it was a hard sell, man.
Mm.
A hard sell, and it took decades for it to really catch on. And it's only really in the last 10, maybe 15 years that it's gained more broader acceptance in the larger psychological community, and then finally got some kind of evidence-based designation, which is meaningless to me and many. But basically, it was a hard sell to view ourselves as multiple, right?
Mm.
Even though it's intuitive even to a child. But I think really it's because it was coming up against the indoctrinated view of mainstream psychiatry and psychology, right? Which was had already, coined the term multiple personality and made that a disorder and all that. So it was bucking up
Right.
against that. that's my personal view of why it was such a hard sell and took so many decades to really come online for what it is and the
Right.
magic behind it. So I went in, I discovered it in 2006. I went in and out of it for a long time. And it wasn't until about a year after the whole kind of dark night and my sort of beginning to awaken and come online with this stuff that I realized, oh my God, it's time to bring IFS back into my world because
Mm,
it was a perfect gateway, portal, complement to all this that I'm doing. So it's a way to offer a depth therapy experience rooted in multiplicity and helping our parts to unburden their pain and integrate, become whole, like you're saying. And then I started to realize, well, why not bring in the higher sources for this too? So I call it transpersonal IFS for those
mm,
that are inclined to want to have that full spectrum experience. Because IFS really is a shamanic based therapy. I
mm,
guess we'd say Western or neo shamanic or quasi shamanic. This is not ancient Siberian shamanism where it all started. It's more academic, but it is practical. It's a way of taking some of the core concepts of ancient Aboriginal shamanism um, into this Western psychology. And and again, to me, it's a perfect complement to what the higher sources, the angels, the master energies are going to come in and how they hold space and even at times come into the work to offer very practical help, like with when we set up like an unburdening ceremony. If we're working with a young wounded part, and that part is ready and the system says yes to help this part to unburden or unload the wound it's carrying. Oftentimes, if we have one of the higher divine emanations present, I'll get a little nudge that's basically saying like that emanation is saying, put me in, coach.
mm-hmm.
Bring me in here. So I'll suggest to my client, if you want, I'm getting the Chamuel saying to invite him in close for this. And if the client's open to that, and it feels right to them, if their system and their parts are okay with the fact that we have this higher source energy with us, then Isis or Chamuel energy, whoever it might be, will come in and lovingly cradle that part, magically unburden it in a whole variety of ways, and it's just like it can't be beat.
Mm, that's beautiful,
Can't
man.
be beat. When it's right, a person is really open to that because it's pretty fucking weird. Sorry, should I be?
That's
Is
fine.
it
Oh
okay?
yeah, I was gonna say. I think that's the perfect way to describe it, though, because
Yeah,
it's not something that that aspect you're not gonna see in your standard psychology text, right?
you're
But
not. You're not. No, as I often joke with my clients, I say when we get through with a session like that, where all sorts of mystical stuff happen, I'll be like, "This ain't no CBT, is it?"
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
you actually use the word transpersonal psychology. That's the name of the major at my school. It's not holistic psychology. You use the right
Oh
word.
yeah. Oh,
That's what
that
it is.
makes a lot of sense
Yeah,
then.
it's transpersonal psychology is what you can get a major in, but they incorporate
Yeah.
different holistic elements. But
Right.
would you say that the with the emergence of IFS on a more mainstream level, obviously, I think you're taking it to a level that it should be taken to, in that you're optimizing and maximizing the spiritual dimensions to a way that maybe the mainstream doesn't. But in your view, does something like this becoming more mainstream give you a sense that even these structures and systems are kind of moving in the right direction towards a more whole view of the self and actual healing?
Yes.
Yeah, as
Yes. Short answer, yes, 100%. Absolutely. I think it's the only direction to go
Hmm,
as a culture, as a planet, as a collective consciousness. It's the only direction to go for
hmm.
sure. And I'm very glad that it is. It's 11:11 right now on my clock as I'm
Yep,
saying.
right here too. Yep,
So beautiful confirmation.
yep.
Um, yeah, man. I mean, yes, I don't know what more I can say, but absolutely, definitively, yes. And I'm so glad for it. And it makes me reflect on why was it that it was, 2018 into 19 for me that it all came crashing down. so that I could have the opportunity to kind of reinvent,
Mm,
maybe not an accident that it was that timing, because maybe any sooner collectively for me to sort of start offering all this kind of pretty out there stuff. Not that I'm the only one, I'm certainly not, right? But
mhm,
I am someone who is in operating still within the licensed traditional therapy field, right? Pushing the envelope, I guess, but
mhm,
that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And like I said, I was told just say yes and show up fearlessly and put it all out there and trust that you will be guided and protected. And so far, knock on wood, I have been, right?
mhm.
I don't get any pushback really.
That's
So,
beautiful.
so I take that as confirmation that I am protected and guided and I'm on the right track. Where was I trying to go with this? Oh, maybe that it couldn't have really happened any sooner because we all
Mhm.
know what happened in 2020, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's a cracking open in various ways. We could say that that was a cracking open individually and collectively, right?
Yeah.
Because I think I do agree with that notion that really maybe ever since 9/11, but certainly since 2020, this is now a post-truth world we live in.
Mm,
Like
absolutely.
whereas all we would always all have been wise to question everything,
Mm-hmm.
now more than ever so, right? Would you agree?
100% actually. And you know what's interesting? I went to so I'm a big meditator, right? And so I did
Yeah,
a 10-day silent meditation retreat, the Vipassana retreat. And
nice.
so that was a profound experience. Bringing that up to bring some context of what I was about to say next. And I went to the
Yeah.
after this, ended up going to the this place called the Thousand of the or the Garden of a Thousand Buddhas, right? And so, and that concept is one that's not very well known in Buddhism, but like that there's 1,000 different types of Buddhas who are meant to incarnate onto the earth, right? And provide
Yeah.
different paths of awakening, right? And different areas in which they represent the Buddha for certain elements, right? And so what I went to the
Yeah.
intention with, and I learned that when I went to the garden. I just felt a call to go there. It's located right outside of Missoula, Montana, really middle of nowhere to have this like Buddha structure, but and there's a
Yeah.
thousand Buddhas all around the whole garden. It's a beautiful gardens, and
Wow.
each Buddha statue there represents a different area of a different Buddha. And so I went and I said, all right, I'm gonna pick a number from 1 to 1,000, and
Yeah.
it's gonna tell me what is my Buddha path, right? What is if I am to be
Nice.
because the idea of Buddhism is you're meant to become the Buddha, and so
Yeah.
if there's 1,000 different types of Buddhas, what Buddha am I meant to become, right? And so I did number 333. And I was like,
Nice.
all right, let me go find Buddha statue number 333. And so I went and I found it, and it was
Yeah.
the Buddha of truth.
Uh, yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, that very much aligns with my path of
Yeah.
I am an, attempting to awaken people to simple truth, and that's
Yeah.
to remember who you are. That's the
Totally.
foundational truth, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like I was going to tie it back to what you said, but I don't remember how I was going to do that. But
Yeah.
I think
Oh, I
it's
love it though. I
I
love
think
it.
we all have our own sort of unique uh way of awakening and
Yeah.
bringing about truth and questioning, and I think
Yeah.
that that's really what this time is all about. But it starts with the self, and it starts with
Yeah.
breaking down aspects of the different parts we have. It starts with
Yeah.
looking inward, and
That's right.
I love the term holy discernment that you used earlier. Like you're gonna steal portal of transformation, I'm gonna steal holy discernment.
Take it. Take it. Isn't
I
it
love
great? I
I,
know. I mean, like I said, I never heard those two words put together, but that clear as a bell is how it came that day.
right. Well, and
And
it feels like the path of awakening is through holy
yeah,
discernment. That's what I would
totally.
say.
I mean, really, yeah, what a beautiful story about the Buddhas. I hope to visit that place one day, for
Definitely.
real. And you picked 333, of course, right?
Yeah.
Just the ultimate sacred geometrical
Right.
Trinity, repeating Trinity concept. Yeah, to be what did you say, a bringer of truth?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what that Buddha represents.
I mean, it's like, those of us that are in this area maybe always have been, but maybe now we really are actively engaged in this kind of a personal awakening and trying to be more aligned with who we really are, who we always were, who we were meant to be, and what we're here to do. And I like to count myself among you. Um, that we really all are light workers.
Mm,
I mean, that label has sort of been co-opted by the New Age, which
mm.
even New Age is a misnomer because it's all ancient wisdom.
Right.
I always like to say that, right?
The
But
old age. That's
yeah,
the proper term.
but right, exactly. But to be a light worker, is often, as we probably see, it's often not the most grounded way of being.
Mm,
And that's why I think maybe integration and embodiment, to circle back, is why those have become buzzwords. They're important concepts. I'm really still learning what they really mean, or all that they can mean in practice, in practical reality. But I certainly subscribe more than ever in these last few years to the idea that if we want to soar the heights, if we want to touch the clouds, we better have our feet on the ground.
mm.
Otherwise, we are going to float away. And
Yeah.
maybe even, and I mean that literally and figuratively. I mean, part of what I mean is like get lost in delusion,
Yeah.
right? If there's any predisposition to delusionality or psychosis, we're going to go there if we're not embodied, if we're not in our body, or if we've been indoctrinated to believe that the body doesn't exist or it's not important, right? Or we don't have to be grounded. That can be dangerous, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've seen clear cases of that in,
Yeah.
amongst colleagues when I was working at I would say not the primary, it wasn't everybody in there, but the primary at the homeless shelter for mental health, and
Yeah.
particularly people was like it was like a form of psychosis, but it's like the people weren't grounded. They weren't in their bodies. They were, and
Yeah.
it was difficult because I was more there as a social worker. I wasn't the one, I'm
Right.
not giving them mental health counseling or anything like that. But it's
Right.
like, I want to provide like a spiritual, like guidance for these people, right? Bring them back into the
Yeah.
body. Let's meditate. Let's breathe. Let's come back, because I think
Sure.
you can live in the clouds in a sense, and it'll actually dissuade you from the highest of truths that we're meant to experience in this reality because
Yeah.
we're meant to experience them in the body and here on the beauties of earth and
That's
there's
right.
that's where the
Yes.
purest form of wisdom lives when we can recognize it,
Right.
just by sitting
Yeah.
outside by a river and you have a connection with God or a higher being or whatever it may be, and you
Yeah.
experience it in that way, then it almost makes it practical instead of
Totally.
just, and so I
Yes.
think there's deep truth in that lack of, I think one of the primary issues in our society has been a lack of embodiment and a lack of groundedness. And, we're
Yeah.
kind of constantly go, 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 go. And we're just
Yeah.
living, running through life, right?
Oh,
It's like,
completely. And
yeah.
and now we live in the age of distraction, of course, right?
Hmm.
With
Right.
digital everything, and we're all being tracked, and we're all a target market,
Yeah.
and
No, exactly.
all
One,
that. So it's even more of a challenge. It's not easier, is it?
No, definitely. And a big concept I talk about on the podcast a lot is like the technological revolution and transhumanism. So as we're kind of moving forward, and I
Yeah.
think what we're alluding to now, where this is the time to really initiate awakening on a personal level, is
Yeah.
the technology is going to become so infringing if we're not doing this work now, that it almost might.
Yeah.
I don't think you can ever truly uh, lose the soul in a way. I mean, I've had people on the show tell me that like, it's the technology is meant to trap the soul, and it's kind of,
Mm.
and I think there's elements of truth to it, but in the same
Yeah.
sense, I think it's right in that we can really cut off our spiritual connection if we decide to augment ourselves with Neuralink or
Yeah.
something down along those lines where
Right.
the technology is within us. Then it's, well,
Yeah.
how much spiritual connection can we truly have at that or tap into? So
Agreed.
I think it's a very important time to
Yeah.
engage in that inner work and inner awakening, through concepts like you're teaching. Because I think no, you're not just providing healing, you're providing like awakening, truth, connection. And I think connection is the one of the primary things we devoid or is devoid of in our society. So, and whether
Oh,
that's with one
absolutely.
another or with higher beings, it comes back to connection.
No
And I,
doubt. And that's the essence of, in psychotherapy, in counseling. That's one of the things I'm grateful for my traditional training is that it really instilled that concept of relationality, connection,
mm,
attachment, right? I mean, no one can escape that. No man is an island, right?
yeah,
We all need and thrive on that. It's the only way. So that's the still, even though I'm doing alternative stuff and spiritual work and whatnot, it's really still always was and still is about the connection itself.
yeah. And
It's
I,
got it's got to be rooted in there. And that's a lot about the development of trust and safety and being in integrity, right?
right. And then, well, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I always come back to that.
Yeah,
It's like, what's the foundation? It is that security. You know,
exactly.
above that, it's about it's connection and relationships. So it's like hone in
That's
on
right.
those, and then you can spiritually ascend. But come
Yeah.
back to the connections first. You know.
And just and that makes me think about what you've been sharing about working in the homeless shelter,
Mm.
right? So what are the basic needs there that are maybe just basically being met? Shelter,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Food, clothing, shelter, right? Before you can get to self-esteem needs or anything even grander than that, right?
Hmm.
People have to know that they're safe where they are, that they're
Right.
basically safe in their body, they're safe in place and time. They have food, they have clothing, they have shelter, right?
Right.
In the private psychotherapy world, I'm not really dealing much with that.
Right.
I
I
did a
got you.
good I did a good amount back in community mental health, which was largely like Medicaid or 10 care population for a good time. And almost everybody I worked with had a case manager to help them with, some of those basics, food boxes,
Hmm.
entitlements, benefits, and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that showed me was I couldn't be too highfalutin about what I was trying to do with people back then. They're
Yeah.
just trying to survive
Right. Exactly.
in large part, right?
And there's a lot of people, even I'm sure even some people who are listening to the podcast where it's like there's a
Mm.
lot of people who are maybe paycheck to paycheck. They don't know where they don't
Right,
know where their next meal's coming from. And that's with the way our society, the direction our society is moving. And you look at inflation, the economics, and sort of the destruction of certain aspects of society, that's in a lot of ways only going to increase. So it's like, let's bring it back to connection. Let's bring it back to
yeah,
security. Let's meet at that level first. All right, we're there. Then we can, start moving on to the self-esteem and whatnot. But
yeah,
I think it starts though with regardless of what happens, feeling a sense of security within oneself to navigate the world, regardless of what it throws at you, and regardless of,
right,
if your house gets foreclosed on, well, can you still feel at home within yourself and who you are and know who you are? And obviously, it's a difficult situation, but can you
yeah,
walk with integrity despite it? And
right,
and I think
right,
that in itself can be a channel to higher awakening and to,
yeah,
becoming who we're meant to be. It's through going through periods of suffering that are like that maybe are more physical and circumstantial, because suffering is suffering at the end of the day. Regardless, it can lead to the same type of, uh,
right.
I guess, resolve and awakening.
Yeah,
You
love
know,
it, love it.
so
Yes, indeed.
awesome, awesome, brother. I mean,
We think alike, my friend.
we really do. I was gonna say it'd be easy for us to go on for hours and hours and hours. So
Yes,
I think that means we're gonna have to plan for a podcast part two,
sure,
in the
man.
very near future, man.
Be my pleasure.
But so Chris, where would if anyone who wants to get in contact with you or find your work, where would you send them along to? Like, you got a
Yeah,
website or would you?
yeah. Two places. Website is therapyoutsidethebox.com. And then I'm pretty active on IG. So that's just at therapy outside the box.
Easy enough.
Those
Easy
are
enough.
easy places to find.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say easy to find, so I'll put
Yeah.
that in the episode show notes, brother. But
Yeah.
this is a lot of fun, man, and like
It's great.
There's like I was saying, I feel like we could, in a way, we're just cracking open some of the the doors to certain areas. So
That's
I'd love to
right.
plan on doing another podcast, and I'm glad we made this one
Yeah.
happen. 'Cause-
Yeah. Especially maybe if there's we see where this whole orb and drone phenomenon is going on, right?
Mm.
Or where that's going.
Yeah,
Uh, Whatever might or may or may not come out in terms of clarity about that, that might be an interesting thing to pick back up on.
I'd love to, man. Let's plan for that. I'm sure we're gonna get some sort of
Yeah.
I don't know if resolution or resolve is the right word, but clarity will
Yeah.
continue. Our sense of clarity will continue to heighten on it. So
Right.
I'd
Right.
love to, man. That's an area
Oh yeah.
I've studied a lot on Project Bluebeam and the and the work of
Yeah.
Stephen Greer, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's that's a rabbit hole I'm always down to explore.
Oh yeah. We had to end on the super weird note. Why not, right?
Always, always. That's the way we do it in the fifth dimension. Well,
Love it.
thank you to all the listeners for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode. Special thank you to Chris for coming on the fifth dimension. Man, man, I love this conversation. I love it. I'm glad you guys made it through and you are here listening. I appreciate you guys. Head on over to his website, therapyoutsidethebox.com, and over on his Instagram, Therapy Outside the Box. Really great content on there, and I would highly encourage you guys to work with him one-on-one in that setting because there's a lot of magic to unpack and to really step into who you are meant to be. It's right there for you, baby. So, and I think Chris is a beautiful divine conduit to facilitate healing, facilitate growth. It's what he's here to do, and he is living in his authenticity, and I just love that about him. So can't say enough good things about Chris. Look forward to our next podcast conversation, brother, and it'll be in the very near future. So if you're a fan of this show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, wherever it may be. That's right, the full episodes are posted on Twitter if you didn't know. If you ever want to catch it on there, be sure to subscribe, 5-star review, rating, whatever it may be. Appreciate it. You can head on over to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com, and subscribe for there. Also, book a one-on-one tarot meditative experience with me. 20% off using the code 5D upon checkout. And if you buy two, you will get a third one scheduled for free. Can't really beat that. Along with the discount, you're getting a really good value. Um, so, really, can't beat it. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires here in Chamberlain, South Dakota, your one-stop shop for your holistic wellness, metaphysical needs. That's going to wrap up this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to subscribe because there are a lot of great interviews that haven't even been released yet. A lot of great conversations lined up that I'm excited to share with you. And we are moving into the new year going strong, maybe. That's going to wrap up this episode. I'll see you all next time. So long.